From a very young age, I was obsessed with saving money. And if you've listened to me for a long time, you already know that from right out of college, I resolved that I was going to live on every other paycheck. Going through college, I'd lived a very bare bones existence. I lived on whatever food I could scrounge up a deal on. I was very, 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 very thrifty. And so in college, I had to get used to living on very little money. I even had a semester I couldn't buy my textbooks, so I didn't have the money. I made it through that semester somehow. And so when you first get a job out of whatever schooling you do, you're used to getting by on such a little amount of money, and then suddenly you get this paycheck from, let's say, your first real job, and suddenly what's known as the marginal propensity to consume, it's an economic principle that means as our income goes up, magically somehow our spending goes right up with it. The key habit you'll see of people who are into FI, financial independence, also known as mega savers or super savers, or various terms like that are used. There are certain things that are generally consistent. And it's a mentality. In my case, it was living on every other paycheck. Today, what's very common is people who come out of school of whatever level become instant savers for retirement. Roth IRAs. I mean, it's fascinating to me how many people I hear from that are plus or minus 20 a couple of years are familiar with Roth IRAs and asking about them and how to start one, how to fund one, what the money should be in, that kind of thing. I mean, it's in their vocabulary, it's in their head. And habits that start young make a difference. But there's other things as well about financial habits. Principal Financial Group did a survey and found that one of the things of people that are good savers, regardless of income, this is important, regardless of income, because they found that a lot of people who make around $35,000 a year were doing really well saving money for the future. And you think at 35 in a lot of metro areas, how do you even pay all your bills every month? But there are a lot of people at 35,000 and more who are saving substantial amount of money for retirement. What is consistent whether somebody makes 35,000 or makes hundreds of thousands of dollars? They don't ever buy a new car. They buy only used cars. They drive that car, as I call it, till the wheels fall off. Think about how many people, if you're a long-time listener to me, you'll hear quote back to me, yeah, I'm going to drive my car till the wheels fall off. And you may wonder, why do I put this big emphasis on the cars, transportation? Because that is the second biggest expense that the typical person or family has in their lives, is that set of wheels. Truck, SUV, whatever. I think about people who have pickup trucks and how many pickup trucks you see now that cost $60,000 to $100,000. And there are all these fancy new pickup trucks on the road. And then you see other people, and you'll be at a work site and you see people with these fancy King Ranch F-150s and all this stuff. And then you see somebody at that construction site who's driving an old beat-up pickup truck. And, both of them got to the construction site that day. but one of them has a big monthly payment, and the other has been paid for forever. So another thing I have shared in the past, but not in a good while, that in my TV work, I used to do these things where I'd go to schools of different levels, from elementary school to college. And we do what we called a Get Clark Smart, or a Clark Town Hall, depending on what the TV channel wanted to call it at that time, or network. And I always had this thing with 2 slides. And it didn't matter, again, if these were elementary school kids or college students or anywhere in between. I'd show these 2 slides. And I'd ask which family were the millionaires. And one would be a picture of a modest home, an older vehicle, and various household possessions that had some age on them. And then the other would be a big, fancy new house with fancy vehicles, vehicles, and all these other things. And it didn't matter if they were elementary school kids, college students, in between. Overwhelmingly, they would say it was the slides of the fancy family with the fancy stuff that were the millionaires. But as the late Professor Stanley, who wrote The Millionaire Next Door, found out more than a generation ago, that most millionaires live in a modest home. Most millionaires drive a very old, just modest vehicle. That things that they consume, they're very careful with, because the key is saving money. The other thing is that most millionaires turned out to be people who owned service businesses. And people that are wealthy tend to not care about how it looked to the neighbor. The neighbor has a fancy car, so man, we look like nothing. Look at our old car. But I remember forever ago, I had an employee who was really into saving money, and she said to me, anytime we'd be out and about and we'd see a fancy car, she'd say, leased. And I loved it, because the point was that somebody was a show horse. They were trying to show off. They weren't being careful with their money. So know that there's a mentality involved. The mentality is basically you walk softly with modesty and you're quiet about what you accomplish. But the point is to live a life of good habits with what you save and what you spend your money on, regardless of what you make past subsistence. It's how you choose those decisions that makes all the difference on whether or not you are financially dependent in your life or you're financially independent in your life.